The Montana winter of 1885 showed no mercy to the living. Snow had fallen for 3 days straight, transforming the landscape into an endless sea of white broken only by the skeletal silhouettes of bare trees. The air was so cold it burned the lungs with each breath. Miles Harrington pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he dismounted from his stallion. At 40, the former military man carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd seen enough of the world to be wary of it. His eyes, gray as the winter sky, scanned the snow-covered trail ahead of him. That's when he saw it, a dark shape half buried in the pristine white. Miles approached cautiously, one hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. As he brushed away the snow, his suspicions were confirmed. A man's face, blue-tinged and frozen in a grimace, stared up at the endless sky. "Damn," Miles muttered, kneeling beside the body. The local sheriff would later declare it another victim of Montana's unforgiving winter. Just another drifter who'd had too much whiskey and succumbed to the cold. But Miles had seen enough death to recognize its many faces. The discoloration around the neck told a different story than the official one. Someone had helped this man meet his maker. Miles marked the location in his mind and continued his journey. He had debts to collect, and sentiment was a luxury he'd abandoned years ago, along with any illusions about the goodness of mankind. The Harper cabin appeared on the horizon like a ship lost at sea, small, weathered, and barely staying afloat in a storm of snow. Smoke struggled from the chimney, a thin gray line against the white backdrop. The roof sagged beneath its burden of snow. A tin pot sat beneath a leak, half full of ice. Miles knocked firmly on the door. Silence greeted him. He knocked again, harder this time. The door cracked open just enough for 5 small faces to peer out. Children, their ages ranging from toddler to nearly grown, with eyes too old for their young faces. Behind them stood a woman, her frame thin but her posture unbending. Eleanor Harper, 28, hollow-eyed, held a feverish child against her shoulder. Unlike most folks who trembled at Miles' arrival, she didn't flinch when she saw him. Something in her gaze suggested she'd faced worse demons than a debt collector. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "James's debt. Give me until spring." Miles pulled the folded papers from his coat. $800, 3 months overdue since James Harper died. The land was worth triple that, maybe more if the railroad rumors were true. The businessmen back in town were already dividing up the spoils in their minds. He studied her closely, noting the details she probably hoped he wouldn't. The eldest boy, Matthew, maybe 12, stood beside her like a sentinel. The children wore patched clothes, no shoes indoors despite the cold. A single lamp burned low on the table, conserving precious oil. "I don't beg, Mr. Harrington," Eleanor said, her chin lifting slightly. "I'm asking for time, nothing more." Miles folded the papers back into his coat without answering. His gaze caught something near the threshold, a dark stain that might have been mud to an untrained eye. But Miles recognized dry blood when he saw it. The window to his right had been broken and mended with a patchwork of materials, not the work of winter storm damage, but something more violent. As he mounted his horse and rode away, something caught his eye in the snow near the cabin, a scrap of paper partially buried. He retrieved it without dismounting, tucking it into his pocket without examination. 50 yards away, he stopped and looked back. The children watched from the window, faces pressed against the glass like prisoners. The smallest one waved tentatively. Miles turned away as snow began falling again. "Mom." His chest felt tight, a sensation he hadn't allowed himself in 5 years. 3 months until spring. He'd given harsher terms to better prospects, but he kept seeing those 5 faces, especially the eldest boy's eyes. Distrustful, protective, haunted. Something wasn't right about James Harper's accident. The pieces didn't fit, and Miles had always been good at puzzles. When he unfolded the scrap of paper later that night in the privacy of his study, his suspicions deepened. It was torn from a larger document, containing only a fragment of text. "Remain silent if you value their lives." A threat, not a casual note. Miles stared into the fire, the implications burning in his mind brighter than the flames. The Silver Dollar Saloon hummed with activity despite the bitter cold outside. Men huddled around tables, nursing whiskeys and sharing stories that grew taller with each empty glass. Miles slid onto a stool at the bar, ordering a drink he wouldn't finish. "Harrington," a voice called from a corner table. "Join us." Victor Sterling, president of First Montana Bank, gestured expansively. Beside him sat Clayton Pierce, head of the town council and owner of most of the businesses on Main Street. Together they controlled more of White Ridge than the actual mayor. Miles nodded in acknowledgement but remained at the bar. He wasn't in the mood for their company, but in his line of work, information was currency, and these men trafficked in both. Sterling wasn't deterred. He abandoned his table and settled next to Miles, his expensive coat reeking of cologne strong enough to cut through the saloon's blend of tobacco and spilled whiskey. "How was your collection route today?" Sterling asked, too casually. "Any difficulties?" Miles took a measured sip of his drink. "The usual. Some will pay, some need persuading." "And the Harper place?" Sterling pressed, his voice dropping. "Eleanor Harper still dwelling on that worthless patch of land?" "She's asked for an extension. Until spring." Sterling's face tightened momentarily before relaxing into a practiced smile. But Miles noticed something unusual, a flicker of relief quickly masked behind the banker's professional demeanor. "Sentiment is expensive in our business, Miles. That land is worth more vacant than with squatters." As he spoke, Sterling glanced nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone to enter. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass, revealing a faint bruise around his wrist, partially hidden by his cuff. "Squatters?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "Harper paid for that land. His widow's just behind on a loan." "Details," Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "The point is, that area is developing. Forward-thinking men are making investments." "The railroad," Miles stated flatly. Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly. "Among other opportunities, I'd hate to see you miss out because you're softening." As Sterling returned to his table, Miles noticed how he leaned close to Pierce, whispering urgently. Both men glanced in his direction before looking away too quickly. Outside the saloon, Miles was unlocking his horse when a voice spoke from the shadows. "Don't go back to the Harper place." Miles turned to find an old man leaning against the building. Frank Weber, a grizzled former prospector who'd lived in the territory longer than most. "Didn't know you had business with the Harpers," Miles replied evenly. "James Harper was my friend," Weber said, moving closer. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. "His death wasn't no accident." "The sheriff's report is worth less than the paper it's written on," Weber interrupted, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "James found something out, something big, and they silenced him for it." "They?" "You're a smart man, Harrington. Don't play dumb." Weber's voice was barely audible now. "That family's marked, and you'll be next if you don't mind your business." Before Miles could question him further, Weber slipped away into the darkness between buildings, leaving Miles with more questions than answers and an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. That night, Miles couldn't sleep. The body in the snow, the blood on the Harper threshold, the scrap of threatening note, Weber's warning, all of it swirled in his mind like the snow outside his window. His business ledgers lay open on his desk, numbers that usually brought him comfort now seeming hollow. By dawn, Miles had made his decision. He loaded a wagon with flour, salt, preserved meat, medicines, and, hidden beneath a tarp, a Winchester rifle and extra ammunition. He told himself it was just business, protecting an investment until spring. The lie was thin, even to his own ears. As the wagon crested the hill overlooking the Harper cabin, Miles spotted movement, 3 riders approaching from the opposite direction. He recognized the lead horse. It belonged to one of Sterling's men. Miles snapped the reins, urging his team forward. Eleanor Harper was standing in the doorway when the 3 men rode up, her face a mask of controlled fear. Matthew stood beside her, a rusted old rifle clutched in hands too young for such burdens. "Mrs. Harper," the lead rider called, dismounting, "Mr. Sterling sends his regrets that you've decided to be difficult about this matter." "We have until spring," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. Mr. Harrington agreed. "Mr. Harrington doesn't make the final decisions," the man cut her off. "Mr. Sterling has purchased your debt note. The terms have changed." The man took a step forward and Matthew raised the rifle higher. "Don't come closer," the boy warned, his young voice cracking. The men laughed, but their laughter died when Miles's wagon rolled into view. "Is there a problem here?" Miles called out, his voice carrying across the snowy yard. The lead rider turned, surprise flashing across his face before settling into calculated neutrality. "No problem, Harrington. Bank business." Miles stepped down from the wagon, moving deliberately to stand beside Eleanor and Matthew. "I wasn't aware Sterling had authority to override my collection arrangements." "Times change," the man shrugged. "So do ownership of debts." "Interesting," Miles replied, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Because I have the only legal copy of the Harper debt note right here." He patted his coat pocket. "So unless Sterling has suddenly started forging documents, I'd say you boys are overstepping." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft whimpering of the youngest Harper child from inside the cabin. "Sterling won't like this," the man finally said. "Sterling doesn't have to," Miles answered. "Now ride out and tell your boss if he wants to discuss terms, he can speak to me directly." The men retreated, throwing dark glances over their shoulders as they rode away. When they were out of sight, Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly, the only sign she allowed of her relief. "They've come before," she said quietly, ushering her children back inside. "Different men, same message, always after James." She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Inside the cabin, Miles saw the true extent of their situation. The space was clean but desperately poor. The children, Matthew 12, Emma 10, Daniel 8, Alice 6, and little Sophia 4, huddled near the small fire. Sophia coughed weakly in her older sister's arms, her small face flushed with fever. Emma, tall for her age with her father's thoughtful eyes, held Sophia with practiced care, humming softly to soothe her sister's cough. Daniel stood protectively near the window, a miniature version of Matthew with the same watchful gaze, but a quicker smile. Little Alice clutched a worn rag doll, her small chin jutting forward with the same quiet determination Miles had already noticed in their mother. Miles unloaded the supplies, explaining his proposition as he worked. "You and Matthew can work at my ranch to offset the debt. Fair wages against what you owe." Eleanor studied him, suspicion and desperation warring in her eyes. "Why would you do this?" Miles continued unpacking, avoiding her penetrating gaze. "Business sense. Dead debtors don't pay." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the part he was comfortable admitting, even to himself. "I won't be alone with strangers," Eleanor stated firmly. Matthew stepped forward, standing as tall as his 12 years would allow. "I'll come too. Mama isn't going anywhere without me." Miles saw himself at that age, orphaned, suspicious, protective. He'd survived by trusting no one. The boy had good instincts. "Fair enough," Miles nodded. "Both of you, work starts tomorrow." As Miles prepared to leave, little Sophia approached him cautiously, offering a small wooden carving of a horse. "For the food," she said simply, pressing it into his gloved hand. Miles stared at the crude carving, something twisting in his chest. "Keep it," he said gruffly, pressing it back into her small palm. "I don't take from children." Eleanor watched this exchange with an expression Miles couldn't read. For a fleeting moment, something passed between them. Not trust exactly, but its distant cousin. Understanding. Sterling found Miles in his study that evening, not bothering to knock before barging in. The banker's face was flushed with either the cold or anger, possibly both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sterling demanded, pouring himself whiskey without invitation. Miles set down his pen calmly. "Protecting my investment." "By undermining my authority? My men said you threatened them." "Your men," Miles emphasized, "were trespassing on property under my financial jurisdiction, threatening a widow and her children. The only reason they rode away intact was professional courtesy to you." Sterling drained his glass in one swallow. "The Harper place is a crucial parcel." "For the railroad," Miles stated, "among other interests." Sterling paced before the fire, speaking loudly as if for unseen ears. Then leaning closer to Miles while refilling his glass, he whispered almost imperceptibly, "Be careful. They're watching all of us." Straightening again, his voice returned to normal volume. "There's a plan in motion, Miles. Important men have committed resources. The widow and her brats are standing in the way of progress." Miles noted how Sterling's eyes told a different story than his harsh words. A warning, perhaps even a plea. Miles leaned back in his chair, observing Sterling's agitation with detached interest. And James Harper? Was he standing in the way of progress too? Sterling froze momentarily before continuing his pacing. Harper's death was unfortunate. A foolish man who drank too much and rode too carelessly near a cliff edge. Is that the official story? It's the truth, Sterling snapped, slamming his glass down. Don't make the same mistakes he did, Miles. Don't allow sentimentality to cloud your judgment. As Sterling reached the door, he turned back, his voice lower. Don't let your fate become like James Harper's. After Sterling left, Miles sat motionless, the implied threat hanging in the air. He pulled out the scrap of paper he'd found near the Harper cabin, reading again the fragmentary warning. Sterling's parting words seemed to complete the message. Outside, snow began falling again in earnest. Tomorrow, Eleanor and Matthew Harper would arrive to begin work. Miles would be bringing them into whatever danger had already claimed James Harper's life. The responsible course would be to distance himself. Instead, he unlocked a cabinet and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay a badge he hadn't looked at in years from his time as a military lawyer. Next to it was a folded letter from Catherine, the last thing she'd written before she died. Some debts can't be measured in dollars, she'd written. Some are paid in courage. Miles closed the box. He would need to tread carefully. Sterling and Pierce clearly had powerful allies. The dead man in the snow was proof of how they dealt with obstacles. Eleanor Harper wasn't his responsibility. Her children weren't his concern. Yet as he stared into the fire, Miles knew he had already made his choice. 5 young faces peering through a frosted window had somehow breached walls he'd spent years building around himself. The clock struck midnight. The new day would bring Eleanor and Matthew Harper to his door, and with them, the beginning of a conflict that had been brewing long before Miles recognized its existence. Outside, the Montana winter raged on, burying secrets beneath its pristine white surface. But spring would come eventually, and with it, the thaw that reveals everything hidden by the snow. Eleanor and Matthew arrived at first light, the boy leading their aging mule while his mother walked beside him. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid morning air. Matthew's posture was rigid, shoulders squared like a man twice his age, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Eleanor had wrapped a faded shawl tightly around her thin frame, but Miles noted she'd given her heavier coat to Matthew. Even in desperate circumstances, her first thought was for her children. Mrs. Harper, Miles greeted them formally, standing on his porch. Matthew. The boy nodded stiffly, suspicion evident in his narrowed eyes. I'm watching you, he said without preamble. You try anything with my mama, and I'll... Matthew, Eleanor cut him off gently. Mr. Harrington has offered us work, not charity. We'll earn our keep. Miles extended his hand to the boy. You have my word. Matthew hesitated, then shook it. His grip was strong for a boy, but Miles felt the slight tremor beneath the bravado. This child had already lost a father. He wouldn't lose his mother, too. Let's get started, Miles said, leading them toward the barn. The day passed in quiet industry. Eleanor proved skillful at accounts, organizing Miles's chaotic ledgers with an efficiency that spoke of education beyond what most frontier women received. Matthew worked in the barn, his initial reluctance giving way to fascination with the horses and equipment. As evening approached, they sat in Miles's kitchen, a simple meal between them. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't entirely strained either. 3 people circling each other cautiously, measuring intentions and boundaries. You were a teacher, Miles observed, watching Eleanor methodically record figures in his ledger. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. How did you know? Your penmanship, the way you organize the accounts systematically. Miles shrugged. Details matter in my line of work. Boston, she said after a moment. I taught there before meeting James. He had dreams of freedom in the West. A shadow crossed her face. Dreams don't keep children fed. No, Miles agreed. They don't. The conversation lapsed back into silence. Through the window, they could see snow beginning to fall again, heavier this time. You should stay tonight, Miles said, nodding toward the worsening weather. The guest rooms are prepared. Matthew tensed, but Eleanor laid a calming hand on his arm. Thank you, she said simply. Later, as darkness settled fully over the ranch, Miles sat alone by the fire in his study. The house felt different with others under its roof, less hollow somehow, though he wouldn't go so far as to call it warmer. A floorboard creaked, and Miles looked up to find Matthew standing in the doorway, his young face solemn in the firelight. "My pa didn't fall off no cliff," the boy said without preamble. Miles set aside his papers. "Come in, Matthew." The boy entered cautiously, perching on the edge of a chair like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. "What makes you say that about your father?" Miles asked, keeping his voice neutral. Matthew stared into the fire, his young face transformed by the dancing shadows into something much older. "Pa was a good rider, knew every inch of our land," his hands clenched into fists. "And he wasn't drinking that day. He was scared, but he wasn't drunk." "Scared of what?" "Don't know exactly," Matthew admitted. He'd been acting strange for weeks, looking over his shoulder, hiding papers under the floorboards, telling us to stay close to the cabin. Miles leaned forward slightly. "Did you tell the sheriff this?" A bitter smile twisted the boy's face, too cynical for his years. "Sheriff wouldn't even talk to me, said I was just a grieving kid making up stories." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "I think they killed him," Matthew finally whispered. "The men who came today, or men like them, they didn't want him talking about something." "What do you think that something was?" "Don't know, but it has to do with our land. They keep coming, offering to buy it for nothing, threatening when we don't sell." Matthew's eyes, when they met Miles's, were burning with a mixture of fear and determination. "They'll kill us too, won't they? Just like Pa." The question hung in the air between them, a child asking for truth, not comfort. Miles wouldn't insult him with lies. "Not if I have anything to say about it," he answered. Matthew studied him, measuring the worth of this promise. Whatever he saw in Miles' expression seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once decisively. "You were a soldier," the boy stated rather than asked. "I can tell by how you stand. Were you in the war?" "After," Miles replied. "And I was a military lawyer, not a battlefield soldier." "But you know how to fight." "Yes." Matthew stood, suddenly looking very young and very tired. "Good, because they won't stop coming." After the boy left, Miles remained by the fire, turning Matthew's words over in his mind. Something about the land, something worth killing for. The railroad was the obvious answer, but Sterling's comments suggested there might be more to it. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves of the house, snow accumulating against the windows. Miles didn't need the barometer to know a blizzard was approaching. Eleanor and Matthew would be staying longer than one night, and somewhere in that storm, enemies were plotting their next move. Miles had stepped between predators and their prey. He'd made himself a target. For the first time in years, that thought didn't bother him as much as it should have. Mid-February brought the kind of blizzard that buried fences and froze livestock where they stood. Within hours, the world outside had vanished beneath a swirling wall of white. Miles, Eleanor, and Matthew were effectively trapped at the ranch, with no way to reach the Harper cabin where the 4 younger children waited with neighbor Edith Cooper. Eleanor paced the main room, worry etched in every line of her face. She paused occasionally at the windows, though there was nothing to see but the endless white of the storm. "Mama, they'll be fine," Matthew tried to reassure her, though his own eyes betrayed his concern. "Miss Cooper's tough." "Edith has weathered worse storms than this," Miles added, stoking the fire higher as the temperature outside plummeted. "She'll keep them safe." "You don't know that." Eleanor's voice was sharp with fear. "Sophia's cough has been getting worse. If she takes a turn—" "Then we ride out at first light when the storm breaks," Miles interrupted calmly. "I know these mountains. We'll get through." Eleanor nodded but didn't stop pacing, her fingers worrying at a worn silver band on her finger. James's wedding ring, Miles guessed. The second night of their confinement, snow piled so high against the windows it blocked the light. They sat by the fire, the silence heavy with unspoken concerns. "Were you always a debt collector?" Eleanor asked suddenly, the question seeming to surprise even her. Miles stared into the flames, considering his answer. "No, started as a ranch hand, saved everything. Bought land when others couldn't hold on." He paused. "Built my fortune foreclosing on failed homesteads. Told myself it was just business. And now, her eyes reflected the firelight, watching him carefully. Now I wonder if I was just afraid, Miles admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Afraid that if I let myself care about anyone, I'd lose them like I lost. He stopped. Eleanor waited, offering neither pressure nor retreat from this unexpected confidence. Catherine, Miles finally said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so long unspoken. My wife, childbirth, 5 years ago. His voice went flat, protective. I buried her, then buried myself in ledgers. Numbers don't hurt you. Numbers don't die. Eleanor's expression softened. James gambled away our savings, trying to pay medical bills for Sophia. She was born too early. Doctors said she wouldn't make it, but she did. Her voice cracked. James couldn't forgive himself. He died ashamed. I won't let his children remember him that way. Miles looked at her fully for the first time, not as a debtor, but as a mirror. Both widowed, both carrying guilt, both surviving alone because it hurt less than risking connection. You ever lose someone you couldn't save? She asked quietly. Every day, he said, so softly the crackling fire almost swallowed the words. This moment of shared understanding was interrupted by Matthew's return from checking on the horses. The boy brought with him a gust of cold air and news that the storm was finally beginning to weaken. We'll be able to ride out by morning, Miles confirmed after consulting the barometer. The trail to your cabin should be passable by noon. Eleanor's relief was palpable, but as they prepared for bed, Miles noticed her lingering in the hallway, her expression troubled. There's something you should know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About James, about why they're really after our land. Miles waited, giving her space to find the words. James wasn't just a farmer, she continued. He was educated, observant. He noticed things. She glanced toward Matthew's room, ensuring he couldn't hear. The last month before he died, he was tracking Sterling and Pierce's land acquisitions, mapping them. For what purpose? He believed they were systematically buying or taking properties along a specific route, not just for the railroad. That was the obvious cover. Eleanor's eyes met his, fear and determination mingling in their depths. James found financial documents, evidence of fraud, forged deeds, fabricated debts. He thought they were creating an empire of stolen land. Did he confront them? No, he was gathering evidence, planning to take it to the territorial governor. Her voice dropped even lower. The night before he died, someone broke into our cabin. James had hidden his journal under the floorboards. They didn't find it, but they found him. In the journal? Miles asked, his mind racing with implications. Still hidden if they haven't found it yet. Matthew knows where. She drew a shaky breath. James wasn't the only one to die mysteriously in the past year. 3 other landowners who refused to sell, all accidents, all convenient for Sterling and Pierce. The dead man in the snow flashed through Miles's mind. Another accident, another convenience. Why tell me this now? Miles asked. Eleanor's gaze was steady despite the fear behind it. Because if something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. For my children's sake. She turned to go, but Miles caught her arm gently. Eleanor, I'll help you find justice for James. You have my word. For a brief moment, the mask of stoic endurance slipped, revealing the depth of her exhaustion and grief. Then she nodded once, composed herself, and disappeared down the hallway. Miles returned to his study, pulling out maps of the territory and land records. If what Eleanor said was true, Sterling and Pierce were orchestrating something far bigger than simple railroad speculation, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who discovered their plan. By dawn, the storm had broken. They rode hard through snowdrifts, Matthew clinging tight behind Miles while Eleanor rode the second horse. When they reached the Harper cabin, the door burst open before they'd fully dismounted. 4 children rushed out, crying with relief. Edith Cooper stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, nodding curtly at Miles in acknowledgement. Eleanor dropped from her horse and gathered her children in her arms, her composure finally breaking as she wept with them. Sophia's cough sounded harsh in the cold air, but her face lit up at the sight of her mother. Miles watched from his saddle, an inexplicable ache in his chest. His ranch was 3 times the size of this cabin, yet in this moment, he'd never felt poorer. As the emotional reunion continued, Miles noticed fresh tracks in the snow around the cabin. More than one set of men's boots, made after the storm had subsided. They'd been watching, waiting. Whatever Sterling and Pierce were planning, it was accelerating now, and Miles had just placed himself squarely in their path. Inside the cabin, Edith Cooper recounted what had happened during the blizzard. Her weathered face remained impassive, but her eyes flickered with concern as she spoke. "Two men came yesterday morning after the snow stopped," she said, keeping her voice low so the children couldn't hear from where they played in the corner. "Said they were checking on folks after the storm." Eleanor tensed. "Did they try to get in?" "Wouldn't have made it past my shotgun if they tried," Edith replied firmly. "But they weren't here for that. They were looking around, measuring with their eyes. One of them went to the back of the property, while the other kept me talking." Miles exchanged a glance with Eleanor. "Did they disturb anything?" "Hard to tell with the snow," Edith admitted, "but they were mighty interested in the ground beneath the old oak. Asked if the Harpers had ever mentioned a cellar or storage area." Matthew, who had been listening silently, suddenly straightened. "Pa's journal," he whispered, eyes widening. Eleanor quieted him with a subtle gesture, but Miles had caught the exchange. The journal was hidden outside, not under the floorboards as Eleanor had suggested. A deliberate misdirection. She was still not completely trusting him. Smart woman. "These men," Edith continued, lowering her voice further, "weren't just Sterling's usual thugs. One of them had military bearing. Reminded me of someone from long ago." Miles's interest sharpened. "What do you mean?" Edith glanced toward the door, as if checking that they were truly alone. "My husband, God rest him, worked these mountains before most folks even knew Montana had silver. 20 years back, a military man came through with surveyors. Called himself the Colonel then, though rumor had it he'd been promoted since." Eleanor and Miles exchanged startled glances at the title so similar to the general. "What happened?" Miles prompted. "My Jacob found something on our claim, something valuable beyond silver. When he refused to sell, accidents started happening. Equipment failures, unexplained fires." Edith's eyes hardened. "Then Jacob had his own accident. Fell down a mine shaft that he'd navigated 1,000 times." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. Edith acknowledged this with a small nod. "What people don't know is that man, that colonel, he wasn't just after minerals. He was part of the government campaign to push natives off their land. The silver and land grabs were financing something bigger." She looked directly at Miles. "If it's the same man now calling himself the general, he's had 20 years to perfect his methods, and he won't stop at one dead Harper." A cold silence followed this revelation. The enormity of what they faced was becoming clearer. Not just a local land scheme, but something with tendrils reaching to the highest levels of power. "Thank you, Edith," Miles said, helping the older woman with her coat. "I'll escort you home." "No need," Edith waved him off. "I've been walking these woods for 70 years. Snow won't stop me now." She fixed Miles with a penetrating stare. "You watch over them, Mr. Harrington. That family has suffered enough." As she turned to leave, she added, "And check the loose stone in the hearth. James trusted me more than he let on." After Edith departed, Miles examined the fireplace while Eleanor settled the children. Behind a cracked stone in the hearth, he found a small pouch. Inside was a rough, unpolished stone, bluish-green with veins of white crystal running through it. "Turquoise," Eleanor said, appearing at his shoulder, "but I've never seen it with those white streaks." Miles turned the stone in his hand. "This is more than turquoise. Those white veins could be silver, but they look different." He pocketed the stone carefully. Whatever it is, James thought it important enough to hide separately from his journal. Miles helped secure the cabin, checking windows, reinforcing the makeshift repairs on the door, and discreetly positioning himself where he could observe the surrounding area. The children gradually relaxed in their mother's presence, though little Sophia's cough punctuated the quiet domestic scene. As evening approached, Sophia's fever returned, more intense than before. Eleanor bathed her forehead with cool water, worry etched in every line of her face. "She needs a doctor," Miles said, watching the child's labored breathing. Eleanor nodded, fear evident in her eyes. "White Ridge is the closest town with a physician. But Sterling's men—" "I'll take her," Miles decided. "Dr. Callahan owes me a favor. He'll be discreet." Eleanor hesitated, torn between the need for medical care and the danger of separating the family. "I'll bring her back by nightfall," Miles promised. Matthew can keep watch here with the rifle. No one will approach the cabin in daylight without being seen. After a brief internal struggle, Eleanor nodded, maternal concern overriding all other considerations. She quickly packed a small bag for Sophia, wrapping the child in multiple blankets against the cold. As Miles prepared to leave with the feverish child, Eleanor caught his arm. "The journal," she said quietly. "Take it with you. It's safer with you than here." The trust implicit in this request wasn't lost on Miles. He nodded, securing the journal inside his coat. "Be careful," Eleanor whispered, her composure slipping momentarily as she pressed a kiss to Sophia's forehead. "Both of you." Miles mounted his horse, cradling Sophia securely against his chest. The little girl looked up at him with trusting eyes despite her illness. "Mr. Miles," she whispered, her voice raspy, "are you going to be my new pa?" The question caught Miles entirely off guard, a surge of emotion rising in his chest that he couldn't immediately identify. "I'm just helping your family for now, little one," he managed to say. Sophia seemed to consider this answer, her feverish eyes studying his face with surprising clarity. "You look at Mama the way my pa used to," she observed simply, before closing her eyes and nestling against him. Miles urged his horse forward, Sophia's innocent words echoing in his mind. He'd been so focused on the external threats that he hadn't fully acknowledged how deeply the Harpers had already worked their way into his carefully guarded heart. White Ridge was stirring to life when Miles rode in, storekeepers clearing snow from boardwalks, and smoke rising from chimneys against the clear morning sky. He kept Sophia bundled and partially hidden, not wanting to draw undue attention to their presence. As he passed the Silver Dollar Saloon, a group of men emerged, their conversation halting abruptly at the sight of Miles. Among them was Sterling, looking uncharacteristically nervous beside a tall, silver-haired stranger whose bearing screamed military even in civilian clothes. A polished silver star gleamed on his lapel, not a sheriff's badge, but something more ornate, custom-made. Miles pulled his hat lower and turned his horse away, but not before catching fragments of their conversation. "Deadline approaching. Harper's situation must be resolved. Cannot afford loose ends." The stranger's cold blue eyes swept over the street, lingering for a moment on Miles and the bundle in his arms before Sterling drew his attention back to their conversation. Miles continued toward Dr. Callahan's office, his mind racing. Had he just glimpsed the general himself? The timing was too coincidental. The presence of such a figure in town immediately after the cabin search suggested events were accelerating. Dr. Callahan's small office sat at the edge of town, a modest clapboard building with a weathered sign. Miles dismounted carefully, ensuring Sophia remained wrapped against the cold. The doctor answered his knock promptly, eyes widening slightly at the sight of Miles holding a child. "Harrington, Sam," he greeted, stepping aside to let them enter. "This is unexpected." "The girl has a severe cough and fever," Miles explained, laying Sophia gently on the examination table. "She needs immediate attention, Doctor." Callahan, a lean, gray-haired man with kind eyes, nodded and began examining Sophia with gentle efficiency. "Harper's youngest, isn't she? I delivered her, if memory serves. Born early." "Yes," Miles confirmed, surprised by the doctor's recall. "Her mother is concerned about pneumonia." "With good reason," Callahan murmured, listening to the child's lungs. "Early stages, but definitely heading that direction." He moved to his cabinet, mixing medicines with practiced hands. "She'll need this tincture every 4 hours, and plenty of steam to ease her breathing." He glanced at Miles curiously. "Since when do you involve yourself with the Harper family? Last I heard, you held their debt note." "Circumstances change," Miles replied vaguely. The doctor's eyes sharpened with understanding. "Indeed they do, especially in this town lately." He lowered his voice. "James Harper was a good man. His accident never sat right with me." Miles studied the doctor, weighing his next words carefully. "Did you examine his body?" "What was left of it," Callahan confirmed grimly. "Fall from that height," he shook his head. "But there were inconsistencies. Bruising patterns that didn't match a simple fall. I mentioned my concerns to Sheriff Daniels. And I was politely reminded that medical practices require patience, and patients require a doctor who doesn't make trouble." The doctor's smile was bitter. Message received. Miles absorbed this and another piece of confirmation. What about the drifter found frozen a few days back? Did you examine him as well? Callahan's eyebrows rose. Curious about two dead men, Harrington? That's a dangerous hobby in Whiteridge these days. He checked Sophia's fever again before answering. Yes, I saw him. Another accident that wasn't. Strangulation marks beneath the collar. Frozen after death, not the cause of it. Did he have identification? Nothing official. But he had a military tattoo, 7th Cavalry, and a letter in his pocket addressed to J.H. Contents were water damaged, illegible. Miles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. J.H. James Harper. Callahan nodded slowly. That was my thought as well. The sheriff confiscated the letter before I could examine it further. He paused, measuring his words carefully. There's something else you should know. The man had a geological specimen pouch, empty when I saw him, but residue inside matched something I've seen only once before. A bluish-green stone with white veins, Miles guessed. Surprise flickered across Callahan's face. You've seen it too, then. It's not just silver and turquoise. Those white streaks are a rare earth mineral, valuable for new electrical technologies. The government has been quietly searching for domestic sources. Miles thought of the stone hidden in his pocket. No wonder James had concealed it separately. Physical proof of what lay beneath their land, beyond what was documented in the journal. Sophia stirred on the table, coughing weakly. Both men turned their attention back to her. She can rest here while the medicine takes effect, Callahan offered. I'll prepare more of the tincture for you to take back to her mother. While Sophia rested, Miles took the opportunity to visit the town records office under the pretense of checking property deeds for his business. The clerk, accustomed to Miles's frequent visits, gave him access without question. Carefully, Miles cross-referenced the properties marked in James Harper's journal with the official records. What he found confirmed James's suspicions. Land transfers with irregularities, signatures that didn't match across documents, dates that had been altered. The pattern of acquisition formed exactly the path James had mapped, following not just the silver vein, but potentially this rare mineral as well. Most disturbing was the ownership trail. While Sterling and Pierce appeared on many documents, several properties had been transferred to a holding company named Argent Ventures. Miles traced the company records to Helena, the territorial capital, but the ownership remained obscured behind layers of legal entities. As he dug deeper into Sterling's involvement, Miles discovered something unexpected. Early correspondence between Sterling and James Harper, dating back over a year. In one partially obscured letter, Sterling appeared to be warning Harper about powerful interests targeting his land. The final line sent a chill through Miles. They have my family. I have no choice. Miles recalled small details he'd previously overlooked. Sterling's trembling hands during their meetings, the way his eyes darted toward doors and windows, the faint bruises visible at his wrists. Once, Miles had even overheard Sterling in hushed, tearful conversation about a daughter's boarding school, where visits were mysteriously prohibited. The picture was becoming more complex. Sterling wasn't simply a willing co-conspirator. He might be caught in the same trap that had claimed James Harper's life, serving the general under duress. A victim playing the role of villain, perhaps even attempting to warn others without endangering his family. By early afternoon, Sophia's fever had reduced enough for travel. Miles thanked Dr. Callahan, compensating him generously for both his medical care and his discretion. Be careful, Harrington, the doctor warned as they prepared to leave. I saw a military man with Sterling today, someone with influence in high places. Whatever you're involved in has powerful interests worried. Miles nodded, settling Sophia securely in his arms. If anything happens to me, there's a journal in my inside pocket. Make sure it reaches Governor Mitchell directly. Callahan's expression was grave. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. They left town by the south road, Miles deliberately taking a longer route to avoid the main thoroughfare where they might be observed. Sophia dozed against his chest, her breathing still labored but less desperate than before. As they crested the hill overlooking the Harper cabin, Miles slowed his horse. Something wasn't right. No smoke rose from the chimney, though the temperature was falling rapidly as afternoon waned. Instinct made him approach cautiously, circling wide to observe the cabin from the cover of trees. The front door stood partially open. No one would leave it so in this cold. Miles dismounted, settling Sophia in a sheltered hollow beneath a pine tree, wrapped securely in blankets. "Stay here," he whispered, though the child was barely awake. "Don't make a sound." Drawing his revolver, Miles advanced through the trees, moving from cover to cover with the stealth of a hunter. As he neared the cabin, he detected movement, two men emerging, their frustration evident in their posture. "Nothing," one said, voice carrying in the clear air. "No papers, no map, nothing under the floorboards." "Keep looking," the second man ordered. "Sterling says it has to be here. Check the barn again." Miles recognized the second voice, Clayton Pierce, the town councilman. So Sterling had sent his partner to oversee the search personally. The situation was escalating. A third man emerged from the cabin, holding something that caught the fading sunlight. "Found this under the girl's mattress," he announced, displaying what appeared to be a letter. "It's addressed to Harrington from someone named Catherine." Miles froze. Catherine, his dead wife? Impossible. Pierce took the letter, examining it. Well, this is interesting. My dearest Miles, if you're reading this, I didn't survive childbirth." He skimmed further. "You should know the truth about your brother-in-law, William. His ambitions have always been dangerous." Miles's blood turned to ice. William, his wife's brother, an ambitious army officer, last he'd heard. Could he be the general? The timing fit. William had been promoted around 5 years ago, shortly after Catherine's death. Pierce carefully pocketed the letter. The general will want to see this. Proof of Harrington's personal connection. He turned to his men. "Burn the cabin. Make it look like an accident. If they return, we'll have them cornered." Fear clutched at Miles's throat. Where were Eleanor and the children? He circled behind the cabin, searching for any sign of them. Near the woodpile, he found evidence of a struggle, trampled snow, a child's mitten, drag marks leading toward the trees. Following the trail cautiously, Miles moved deeper into the forest. After nearly a quarter mile, he discovered a crude shelter formed by fallen logs and pine boughs. And huddled inside, Eleanor with her arms protectively around Emma, Daniel, and Alice. "Miles," Eleanor breathed, relief flooding her face. "Thank God." "Are you hurt?" he asked, quickly checking them for injuries. "No, we're unharmed," Eleanor assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "They came just after you left. Matthew saw them approaching and warned us. We escaped out the back while he distracted them." She reached into her coat, pulling out several folded papers. "We saved some of James's notes. Matthew insisted we keep them separate from the journal." Miles's heart clenched. "Where is Matthew?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "He said he'd follow us. He was right behind us, and then—" She gestured helplessly. "I couldn't go back with the little ones. I couldn't leave them alone." "You did the right thing," Miles reassured her, though dread filled him at the thought of Matthew confronting Pierce's men. "Sophia is safe, just over that ridge. I'm going back for Matthew." "I'm coming with you," Eleanor said firmly, rising to her feet. Miles shook his head. "The younger children need you. Get them to Sophia and wait for me there. If I'm not back by nightfall, go to Edith Cooper's place. She'll shelter you." Eleanor looked torn, maternal instinct warring with the need to find her eldest son. "Trust me," Miles said simply. After a moment, Eleanor nodded. "Be careful. These men, they won't hesitate to hurt a child." The knowledge burned in Miles's chest as he made his way back toward the cabin. Pierce and his men were preparing to set the fire, gathering kindling and lamplight from within the cabin. Miles circled the property, searching for any sign of Matthew. Then he spotted fresh child-sized footprints leading not toward the forest where Eleanor had fled, but toward the creek, where they dug up the journal that morning. The clever boy had created a diversion, leading the searchers away from his mother and siblings. Moving swiftly through the gathering darkness, Miles followed the tracks to the creek bed. As he neared, he heard voices, angry, threatening. "Tell us where the papers are, boy, and this ends easy." "I don't know what you're talking about." Matthew's voice was defiant despite the fear evident in it. Miles approached silently, using the trees for cover. In a small clearing by the creek, Pierce and his man had Matthew backed against a tree. The boy's lip was bleeding, his eye swollen, but his expression remained a mixture of terror and determination. "Your father kept records," Pierce was saying, his cultured voice incongruous with the cruelty of his actions. "Maps, documents, evidence of his delusions. Where did he hide them?" My pa wasn't delusional, Matthew spat back. He knew what you were doing, stealing land, hurting people. Pierce sighed, nodding to his companion. Children today lack proper respect for their elders. The other man stepped forward, drawing back his hand to strike Matthew again. Where's the stone, boy? Pierce demanded. Your father found something on your land, something more valuable than silver. A blue-green stone with white lines. Where is it? Matthew's expression flickered briefly with recognition before hardening again. Don't know about any stone. Pa just had papers. Pierce's face darkened. The general arrives tomorrow to inspect the properties personally. He won't be pleased if we don't have what he wants. He stepped closer to Matthew. Your father thought he could stop us by contacting his friends in the 7th Cavalry. Look how that ended, for both of them. The crack of Miles' revolver split the twilight silence. The bullet struck a tree inches from Pierce's head, sending splinters flying. Touch that boy again, and the next one goes between your eyes, Miles called, stepping into view with his gun leveled. Pierce and his man froze, then slowly raised their hands. Harrington, Pierce greeted, as if they'd met for a business meeting rather than at gunpoint. This is a private matter. The boy was trespassing. On his own property? Miles kept his voice cold, moving to position himself between Matthew and the two men. Interesting interpretation of the law, Councilman. Pierce's expression hardened. You're involving yourself in affairs beyond your understanding, Harrington. The general doesn't tolerate interference. The general, Miles repeated. I've been hearing that name a lot lately. Perhaps it's time we met face to face. He watched Pierce's reaction carefully. I believe we may have some family matters to discuss. A flicker of surprise crossed Pierce's face. You know who he is? I have my suspicions, Miles replied evenly. William always was ambitious to a fault. Recognition dawned in Pierce's eyes. So you did know. He shook his head slightly. It won't help you, Harrington. The general cut family ties long ago. Your connection to his sister won't save you. I'm not looking for salvation, Miles answered. Just justice. He gestured for Matthew to move behind him. Now you're trespassing on Harper land. Leave now and we'll forget this encounter. Pierce's companion, a burly man with cold eyes, shifted his weight slightly. 2 against 1, Harrington, and the boy hardly counts. Miles's smile was deadly. I never was good at arithmetic, but I'm excellent with this. He raised the revolver slightly. Care to test which of us is faster? 10 seconds stretched between them, the only sound the wind through the pines and Matthew's ragged breathing. Finally, Pierce nodded to his man. We're leaving. For now. He fixed Miles with a cold stare. The cabin's already burning. You've nowhere to go, and the general arrives tomorrow. This valley will be his, one way or another. Give him my regards, Miles replied evenly, keeping his gun trained on them as they backed away toward their horses. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Miles lower his weapon, turning to check on Matthew. The boy's face was bruised, blood trickling from his split lip, his eyes swollen nearly shut, but his eyes burned with a fierce light. You came back for me, he said, wonder mixing with pain in his voice. Of course I did, Miles replied, as if there could have been no other option. He helped Matthew to his feet, checking him for further injuries. Can you walk? Your mother and siblings are waiting. Matthew nodded, wincing slightly. They hit me a lot, but I didn't tell them anything. Pride swelled in his voice. I led them away from where Ma and the others were hiding, made them think the papers were buried by the creek. Pride swelled in Miles' chest. You're your father's son. That's certain. As they made their way through the darkening forest, Matthew spoke quietly. They kept asking about some stone. Pa showed me once, said it was proof of why they wanted our land. He glanced up at Miles. Is that what was in the fireplace? The thing you found? Miles nodded, impressed by the boy's perception. Yes, and it's very valuable, more than just silver. The general is coming tomorrow, Matthew said, his young voice suddenly very serious. Pierce said he's going to clean up loose ends. The boy looked up at Miles. That means us, doesn't it? Yes, Miles answered honestly, but we're going to be ready for him. Matthew considered this, then said with conviction beyond his years, we need to fight back. For Pa. We will, Miles promised. But first, we need to get your family somewhere safe. Night had fallen completely by the time they rejoined Eleanor and the children. Behind them, an orange glow on the horizon marked where the Harper cabin burned. The reunion was emotional, Eleanor clinging to Matthew with desperate relief, the younger children crowding around their brother, little Sophia reaching weakly from her nest of blankets to touch his hand. When Eleanor saw Matthew's battered face, her expression hardened into something Miles had not seen before, pure maternal rage. "They will pay for this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Every one of them." Miles watched this family circle, feeling simultaneously part of it and apart from it. These people had become his responsibility, his purpose in a way he'd never anticipated. The wall he'd built around himself after Catherine's death was crumbling, and he found he didn't want to repair it. As they prepared to move, gathering what few possessions they could carry, Miles found Eleanor standing apart, gazing at the distant glow of their burning home. "The letter they found," Miles said quietly, joining them. "It was from my wife, Catherine. She died 5 years ago in childbirth." Eleanor turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. What Pierce read suggests she knew something about her brother William, something she wanted to warn me about. Miles swallowed hard. "I believe William is the general, and if so, this fight just became even more personal." Eleanor studied his face in the starlight. "You never read her letter?" Miles shook his head. "It was with her things. After she died, I couldn't face any of it. I packed everything away." Regret weighed heavy in his voice. "If I had read it, maybe I could have stopped all this before it claimed James's life." Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness. "We can't change the past, Miles. Only to what we do now." She squeezed his hand gently. James would say the same. The simple touch grounded him, bringing clarity to the chaos of emotions and revelations. "We need to get to my ranch tonight," he said. "It's defensible, and they won't expect us to go there directly." "The children can't travel far in this cold," Eleanor worried, glancing back at where Sophia rested. "I know a way," Miles replied. "There's an old trapper's trail that follows the ridge. It's longer but sheltered from the wind. We can make it by midnight if we move carefully." As they prepared the children for the difficult journey, little Sophia, still feverish but more alert after the medicine, reached for Miles's hand. In her other small palm, she held a piece of ice shaped like a crude heart. "I made this for you," she said simply. "On the window before it melted." Miles knelt beside her, carefully taking the already melting ice sculpture. "It's beautiful, Sophia." The child smiled weakly. "I drew our family on the window too. You were in it." Miles glanced at Eleanor, who had paused in her preparations, watching this exchange with an unreadable expression. That's very kind of you, Sophia," Miles said, unable to find better words for the emotion tightening his chest. "Your eyes get warm when you see Mama," Sophia continued, her innocent observation cutting straight to the truth. "Just like in Pa's drawings of her. And when you're not looking, she watches you the same way." Eleanor turned away quickly, but not before Miles caught the flush rising to her cheeks. The innocence of a child's observation had laid bare what adults so carefully concealed. The fragile connection forming between them, a tender shoot pushing through winter's frozen ground. The moment was interrupted by Matthew's urgent whisper. "Riders coming from the town." Miles moved to the edge of their shelter, peering through the trees. In the distance, lantern bobbed along the trail from White Ridge, a search party forming, no doubt led by Pierce. "Time to go," Miles said, gathering up Sophia. "Stay close, move quietly, and leave no tracks where possible." As they set off into the night, a frigid wind began to blow, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they were made. Nature, for once, was their ally. The journey would be difficult. 6 people navigating treacherous mountain trails in darkness, pursued by men who wouldn't hesitate to kill them all. But for the first time in years, Miles felt fully alive. Every sense heightened, every emotion sharp and clear. The debt collector had found something worth far more than money. He'd found purpose, a family to protect, and perhaps, if they survived what was coming, a second chance at love. As they disappeared into the sheltering darkness of the pines, the moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape. Behind them, their past burned. Ahead lay an uncertain future. But in this moment, they move forward together, bound by shared danger and newfound trust. Miles led them higher into the mountains, where the air grew thinner but clearer. Tomorrow would bring their final confrontation with the general, with William. But tonight was about survival, about the journey that was forging them into something stronger than individuals alone could be. A family, though none of them yet dared name it so. Later that evening, as Miles organized supplies for their journey, a memory surfaced, Sterling visiting the Harper property months earlier. Miles had been collecting payments nearby and observed from a distance as Sterling spoke with James. Unlike the threatening posture of Pierce's men, Sterling had seemed almost deferential, speaking quietly while constantly checking over his shoulder. At one point, he had pressed something into James's hand. What Miles now suspected was one of the warning notes. "Sterling seemed different when he spoke to my husband," Eleanor confirmed when Miles mentioned the observation. "Almost frightened. James once said he thought the banker was being forced into something." He never elaborated. This recollection cast Sterling's actions in a new light. The man had presented himself as a willing participant in William's scheme, but perhaps he'd been playing a more complicated game, one where his family's safety hung in the balance. The night stretched endlessly as Miles led the Harper family along the treacherous ridge trail. Wind whipped around them, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin like tiny needles. The older children trudged forward with remarkable endurance, while Miles carried Sophia, her small body burning with fever against his chest despite the bitter cold. Eleanor moved with quiet determination, stopping occasionally to help Emma and Daniel over difficult sections of the trail. Her face, illuminated briefly when the moon emerged from behind clouds, revealed both exhaustion and iron resolve. She had lost her home twice now, first through James's death and now to Pierce's flames, yet she showed no signs of surrender. Matthew walked point with Miles, his swollen eye and split lip seemingly forgotten as he scanned the darkness for dangers. The boy had transformed in the past days, shedding layers of childhood to reveal a core of resilience that reminded Miles of himself at that age, forced to grow up too quickly by circumstances beyond his control. "There," Miles said, pointing as they crested a rise shortly before midnight. Below them, nestled in a sheltered valley, sat his ranch house, dark now, his workers having retired to their quarters. "We're almost there." "Will they look for us here?" Matthew asked, ever practical. "Eventually," Miles admitted, "but not tonight. Pierce will assume we've fled deeper into the wilderness or toward neighboring settlements." They descended carefully, fatigue making each step treacherous. As they approached the house, Miles signaled for the family to wait in the shelter of the barn while he ensured the main house was secure. The familiar rooms felt different as Miles moved through them, lighting lamps, no longer simply his private sanctuary, but a potential fortress for 6 lives now depending on him. He checked windows, secured doors, and retrieved additional weapons from his gun cabinet before bringing in the exhausted family. Eleanor settled the children in the spare bedrooms, Sophia's ragged coughing echoing through the otherwise quiet house. Miles built fires in every hearth, driving back the cold that had penetrated to their bones during the journey. When Eleanor finally emerged from tending to the children, she looked ready to collapse. Miles guided her to a chair by the kitchen fire, pressing a cup of hot tea into her hands. "They're asleep," she said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "Even Matthew, though he fought it." "They're safe for now," Miles assured her. "My foreman and ranch hands live in the bunkhouse over the ridge. Good men, loyal. They'll help protect us when they arrive in the morning." Eleanor nodded, staring into the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, which remained remarkably clear despite all they had endured. "What happens tomorrow when your brother-in-law arrives?" Miles sat heavily in the chair opposite her. "William was always ambitious, even before he married into my family. Catherine never trusted his methods, though she loved him as a brother." He ran a hand through his hair, still coming to terms with his personal connection to their enemy. "If he's behind all this, he won't stop until he has what he wants." "The stone," Eleanor said, "in the land above whatever it represents." "Yes." Miles pulled the turquoise-like specimen from his pocket, turning it in the firelight. The white veins gleamed with an almost metallic luster. Dr. Callahan said this contains rare earth minerals, elements critical for new electrical technologies. The government has been searching for domestic sources. So this isn't just about silver and railroads. It's about power, national interest, military applications. William always thought 10 steps ahead. Miles carefully returned the stone to his pocket. Whatever's beneath your land is valuable enough to kill for, and William has the connections to exploit it fully. Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. James died for this, and now all of us are targets. We have James's evidence, Miles reminded her. The journal, the maps, this specimen, and whatever papers you and the children managed to save. Together, it's enough to expose the whole operation. If we can get it to the territorial governor, Eleanor said, the unspoken challenge hanging between them, surviving long enough to do so. I have a plan, Miles said, but first, we all need rest. Tomorrow will test us in ways we can't yet imagine. Eleanor nodded, rising unsteadily to her feet. Exhaustion had finally caught up with her remarkable reserves of strength. Miles guided her toward the spare bedroom, but she paused in the hallway. Thank you, she said softly, meeting his eyes directly. Not just for tonight, but for believing us when no one else would. For seeing us as people, not just debtors. In the lamplight, with her guard lowered by fatigue, Eleanor's beauty struck Miles anew. Not just her physical features, but the strength of character that radiated from within. Something shifted between them in that quiet moment, a recognition that transcended their circumstances. Without thinking, Miles reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Eleanor didn't pull away, her eyes holding his with unspoken emotion. I spent 5 years hiding from life after Catherine died, Miles said quietly. Meeting you and your children woke something in me I thought was gone forever. Eleanor's expression softened. For me as well, she admitted. After James died, I thought my heart had turned to stone. I had to be strong for the children. Couldn't allow myself to feel. Words failed them both, but in the silence, understanding flowed. Whatever grew between them, friendship, respect, or something deeper, had roots in shared pain and mutual recognition of the other's strength. Eleanor finally stepped back, composure returning. We should rest. Dawn comes early. Good night, Eleanor, Miles said, releasing her hand reluctantly. She offered a small smile before disappearing into the bedroom, the door closing softly behind her. Miles returned to his study, too wired for sleep despite his physical exhaustion. He spread James's journal and maps across his desk, along with the additional papers Eleanor had saved. The evidence was compelling but scattered. They needed to organize it coherently before approaching the governor. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying the promise of another storm. Miles stared through the window at the moonlit landscape, wondering where William was at this moment, and how much he knew of Miles' involvement with the Harpers. The personal connection complicated everything. William had been family once, Catherine's beloved brother, a frequent visitor to their home before ambition had driven him to higher military circles in Washington. Had he orchestrated James Harper's death, knowing that the land would eventually come under Miles's financial jurisdiction? Had he counted on Miles doing what he'd always done, foreclosing dispassionately, treating it as just business? If so, William had miscalculated. The debt collector had found something more valuable than any mineral in the ground, a reason to stand and fight rather than retreat into the emotional fortress he'd built after Catherine's death. Miles finally dozed in his chair, James's journal open before him, the rare mineral specimen clutched in his hand like a talisman. Dawn broke gray and threatening, heavy clouds sagging with the promise of snow. Miles woke with a start at the sound of hoofbeats approaching. He moved quickly to the window, relaxing slightly when he recognized his foreman, Isaac Turner, leading several ranch hands toward the main house. Miles met them on the porch, quickly explaining the situation in broad terms, that the Harpers were under his protection and that trouble would likely follow them here. Isaac, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for Miles since he'd first purchased the ranch, nodded gravely. The men and I wondered when you'd finally take a stand against Sterling and his lot. Been buying up land all over the valley, forcing folks out. He removed his hat, revealing gray-streaked hair. We stand with you, boss. Just tell us what needs doing. Relief washed through Miles. He'd counted on their loyalty but hadn't been certain how far it would extend. Post lookouts along the ridge and main approach. Anyone comes riding in from town, I want to know before they reach the property line. Isaac nodded, dispatching men with practiced efficiency. Expecting trouble today, specifically? Yes, Miles confirmed. Sterling's partner Pierce burned the Harper cabin last night, and they answer to someone powerful who's arriving today, someone who won't hesitate to use force to get what he wants. Military man, Isaac guessed shrewdly. Been rumors about government men surveying the area, asking strange questions about minerals and water rights. Military, yes. My former brother-in-law, in fact. Isaac's eyebrows rose. Family complications. Those are the worst kind. He glanced toward the house. The widow and her little ones inside? Miles nodded. They traveled half the night to get here. The youngest is sick with fever. My Martha was a nurse before we married, Isaac offered. She could help with the child if the mother's willing. I'd be grateful, Miles said, touched by the offer. And Isaac, this could get dangerous. I won't hold it against any man who chooses to ride out. The foreman's weathered face creased in a rare smile. 5 years I've worked this ranch with you, Mr. Harrington. Seen you drive hard bargains and foreclose on folks down on their luck. Always figured there was something better in you, waiting for the right reason to show itself. He settled his hat back on his head. Reckon this is that reason. We're staying. As Isaac departed to organize the ranch's defenses, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her hair neatly combed, but exhaustion still evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. I heard voices, she explained. The children are still sleeping. My foreman and the ranch hands, Miles told her. They're with us. He led her inside, explaining Isaac's offer of his wife's nursing skills for Sophia. Eleanor accepted gratefully. Her fever hasn't broken. The medicine from Dr. Callahan helped, but she needs more care than I can provide while... She trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the evidence spread across Miles's desk. While we prepare to fight back, Miles finished for her. Matthew told me Pierce mentioned the general would arrive today to inspect the properties personally. We don't have much time to organize our defense, both physical and legal. Eleanor's expression hardened with resolve. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the morning, Eleanor proving remarkably adept at organizing James's scattered evidence into a coherent narrative. Miles contributed his knowledge of property law and local land records, filling gaps in James's documentation. Together, they created a compelling case against Sterling, Pierce, and the mysterious Argent Ventures holding company. Matthew joined them after breakfast, his young face still bruised, but his spirit undimmed. He provided crucial details about his father's investigations in the specific locations James had identified as part of the mineral vein. By midday, a comprehensive document had taken shape. Maps, financial records, witness testimonies, and geological evidence, all pointing to a systematic conspiracy to defraud landowners throughout the valley. This is enough to bring to the governor, Miles said, reviewing their work. The question is how to get it to Helena safely. You won't, a voice interrupted from the doorway. Miles turned to find Isaac, his expression grim. Riders approaching from town, 6 men armed. Sterling and Pierce among them, plus a military man I don't recognize, and 3 others who look like hired guns. William, Miles muttered, sooner than I expected. Eleanor's face paled, but her voice remained steady. What do we do? Miles thought quickly. Isaac, get Mrs. Turner to take the children to the root cellar. It's the most defensible space if things go badly. He moved to his gun cabinet, removing a rifle and additional ammunition. Matthew, go with your siblings. Keep them calm and quiet. I want to help fight, the boy protested. Miles placed a hand on his shoulder. You will help by protecting your brother and sisters if we fail. Your mother and I need to know you're with them. Reluctance warred with understanding on Matthew's young face before he finally nodded. Yes, sir. As Matthew left to join his siblings, Miles handed Eleanor a small revolver. Do you know how to use this? She took it with surprising confidence. James taught me. I'm a fair shot. Miles nodded approvingly. Stay inside, away from the windows. I'll meet them outside. Try to resolve this without bloodshed if possible. And if it's not possible? Eleanor asked quietly. Miles's expression hardened. Then we do what's necessary to protect your children and your husband's legacy. He moved to leave, but Eleanor caught his arm, turning him back to face her. Without hesitation, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a brief, fierce kiss that contained both promise and possibility. For luck, she whispered as she pulled away, color rising in her cheeks. Miles stood momentarily stunned, then recovered, a new determination flooding through him. I'll come back to you, he promised, the words carrying weight beyond the immediate danger. Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I know you will. Miles stepped onto the porch just as the riders approached the main house. Isaac and 3 ranch hands flanked him, rifles ready but not yet raised. Yet, a tense silence fell as the 2 groups assessed each other across the snow-covered yard. At the center of the approaching party rode a distinguished man in his late 40s, his military bearing evident despite civilian clothes. The silver star Miles had glimpsed in town gleamed on his lapel, catching the weak winter sunlight. His features were handsome in a severe way, with cold blue eyes that reminded Miles painfully of Catherine. William, Miles acknowledged, breaking the silence. General William Grant inclined his head slightly. Miles, it's been, 5 years since the funeral? Since you used your sister's death as a networking opportunity, yes. A muscle twitched in William's jaw, the only indication that the barb had struck home. Still bitter, I see. Catherine would be disappointed in what you've become, interfering in legitimate business ventures, harboring a family of squatters. Legitimate? Miles raised an eyebrow. James Harper and the messenger you had killed might disagree, if they weren't both conveniently dead. William sighed, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. Progress requires sacrifice, Miles. The nation needs what's beneath these lands, resources that will secure America's future in the coming century. He gestured expansively. The few must sometimes be displaced for the benefit of the many. Displaced, Miles repeated, an interesting euphemism for murdered. Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, avoiding Miles's gaze. Pierce, by contrast, watched the exchange with the detached interest of a man calculating odds. I've come to offer you one chance out of respect for my sister's memory, William continued, his tone reasonable despite the implicit threat. Turn over the Harper woman and her children, along with any documentation James Harper collected. In return, your involvement will be forgotten. You can keep your ranch, your business interests, continue your life undisturbed. And if I refuse? William's smile was cold. Then this becomes an unfortunate incident of claim jumping. A respected businessman killed defending his property from squatters. Tragic, but not uncommon in these territories. His gaze swept over the ranch hands. And anyone standing with you shares your fate. Isaac spat into the snow. Big talk from a man who sends others to do his killing. William's eyes hardened. I've killed plenty with my own hands, old man. Care to be next? Enough, Miles interjected. The Harpers are under my protection, William. Their land was taken through fraud and intimidation. James Harper was murdered to cover up your operation. He paused, playing at his strongest card. Catherine knew what you were capable of. She warned me in her final letter, the one I was too grief-stricken to read 5 years ago. Something flickered across William's face. Surprise, perhaps even a touch of uncertainty. You're bluffing. Catherine knew nothing of my affairs. She knew enough to warn me about you, Miles countered. And now I have James Harper's evidence too, all of it documented and ready to send to the territorial governor and newspapers across the country if anything happens to us. William's composed mask slipped, revealing the calculating mind beneath. What exactly do you think you know? Everything, Miles stated simply. The rare earth minerals you discovered during military surveying, the shell companies, the systematic elimination of landowners who refuse to sell, the government contracts waiting once you control the entire deposit. He reached into his coat, producing the blue-green stone, including what makes this particular mineral so valuable to the War Department. William's eyes locked onto the specimen, hunger evident in his expression. That belongs to the United States government. It belongs to the Harper family, whose land it came from, Miles corrected. And you tried to steal through your proxies. He nodded towards Sterling and Pierce. William studied Miles for a long moment, reassessing the situation. I've underestimated you, it seems. You've changed from the grieving widower who buried himself in ledgers and foreclosures. People can surprise you, Miles agreed. Now take your men and leave. The evidence has already been dispatched to multiple locations. Killing us won't stop what's coming. For a tense moment, Miles thought William might order an attack regardless. The general's hand hovered near his sidearm, his expression calculating. Then unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. You always were stubborn, Miles. Catherine admired that about you. William straightened in his saddle. Very well, a tactical retreat for now, but don't imagine this is over. He turned his horse, but Pierce leaned forward, protest evident in his posture. General, we can't just— Silence, William cut him off. We're leaving. As the group began to withdraw, Sterling lingered, meeting Miles's eyes briefly. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Then he too turned his horse and followed the others. Miles watched until they disappeared over the ridge, tension draining from his shoulders only when Isaac's lookout confirmed they had left the property entirely. They'll be back, Isaac said quietly. Men like that don't surrender so easily. I know, Miles agreed, but we've bought time at least. He returned to the house to find Eleanor waiting anxiously, the small revolver still clutched in her hand. They've gone, he told her, for now. Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by suspicion. Just like that, they gave up? Not gave up, retreated to reconsider. Miles moved to the window, scanning the distant ridge where the riders had disappeared. William was rattled when I mentioned Catherine's letter and showed him the mineral specimen. It confirmed we know more than he anticipated. What do we do now? Eleanor asked, setting the revolver aside. We get the evidence to the governor immediately, Miles decided. William won't waste time. He'll either attempt to intercept any messenger we send or create a situation where our evidence becomes irrelevant. How? By manufacturing a scenario where you and your children appear to be the criminals. Trespassers killed while attacking a respected businessman, perhaps. Miles's expression was grim. William has the connections to make such a story stick, especially if we're not alive to contradict it. Eleanor absorbed this with remarkable composure. Then we need to move quickly. Miles nodded. I'll send Isaac with copies of the evidence. He knows the back trails better than anyone, can avoid the main roads where William's men might be watching. And us? Eleanor asked. We'll follow separately, taking the children by a different route. If we split up, at least one group has a chance of reaching Helena. Eleanor considered this plan, then nodded decisively. I'll prepare the children. As she turned to go, Miles caught her hand. Eleanor, about what happened before. Color touched her cheeks, but she met his gaze directly. I don't regret it. Neither do I, Miles admitted. When this is over, if we survive, I'd like to see where this might lead. Between us. A small smile curved her lips. I'd like that too. The moment was interrupted by Matthew's arrival, his young face serious. Sophia's fever is worse, he reported. Mrs. Turner says she needs a doctor. Soon. Concern immediately replaced the brief tenderness of the moment. We'll have to risk sending for Dr. Callahan, Miles decided. No need, a new voice announced from the doorway. They turned to find Dr. Callahan himself, snow-dusting his coat, medical bag in hand. Isaac stood behind him, rifle ready but lowered. Found him on the road heading this way, Isaac explained. Says he came to check on the little one. Sterling's men are watching my office, Callahan explained, stamping snow from his boots. When you didn't return for more medicine, I grew concerned. Thought I'd better check on the child myself. He glanced between Miles and Eleanor. Though it seems I've arrived during some excitement. You might say that, Miles agreed dryly. William Grant just paid us a visit. Callahan's eyebrows rose. The general himself? Then matters are escalating even faster than I feared. He removed his coat, handing it to Isaac. I'll see to the child first. Then you can fill me in on developments. As the doctor headed toward the room where Sophia rested, Miles turned to Isaac. Any sign they've left men watching the property? 2 riders on the North Ridge, Isaac confirmed, keeping their distance, but definitely observing. As expected, Miles murmured. They'll report if we try to leave. He thought for a moment. We need a distraction, something to draw their attention while we slip away. A cattle drive, Isaac suggested. We were planning to move the south herd to winter pasture anyway. Lots of dust, men shouting, enough commotion to mask other movements. Miles nodded approvingly. Perfect. Organize it for late afternoon. We'll use the confusion to get the Harpers away from the ranch. He glanced toward the window where snow had begun falling again. The storm will help cover our tracks afterward. As Isaac left to make preparations, Lord Callahan returned from examining Sophia. The child is fighting hard, he reported. I've given her a stronger medicine, but she needs rest in a warm place. Travel would be dangerous in her condition. Eleanor's face tightened with worry. We may not have a choice, Doctor. If we stay here, I understand, Callahan interrupted gently. Sometimes we must choose between imperfect options. He hesitated, then added, I could take her with me, bring her to my home where my wife can nurse her. It might attract less attention than a family traveling together. Miles and Eleanor exchanged glances, silently weighing the proposal. Separating Sophia from her family carried its own risks, but the doctor's reasoning was sound. We'd need to be certain you wouldn't be followed, Miles said carefully. I've lived in these mountains for 30 years, Callahan replied with quiet confidence. I know how to disappear when necessary. After further discussion, they agreed to the doctor's plan. Eleanor spent precious time with Sophia, explaining as best she could to the feverish child why they would be temporarily separated. Mr. Miles will bring you and Matthew and Emma and Daniel soon, she promised, smoothing Sophia's damp hair from her forehead. You just focus on getting better for us. The child nodded weakly, too ill to fully comprehend, but trusting her mother implicitly. Don't forget the ice heart, she whispered. It's important. Eleanor glanced questioningly at Miles, who stood nearby. She made an ice sculpture for me, he explained softly, before we left the cabin. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. Of course we won't forget it, darling, she assured Sophia. It's very important. By mid-afternoon, preparations were complete. Dr. Callahan departed with Sophia bundled securely in his wagon, taking a route that would appear to lead back to town, but would actually circle to his remote home in the foothills. Isaac and the ranch hands began the cattle drive, creating a chaotic scene of dust and noise visible to the observers on the ridge. Under cover of this distraction, Miles led Eleanor and the remaining children toward a narrow trail behind the ranch house, a hunting path known only to him and his most trusted men. They traveled light, carrying only essential supplies, the precious evidence, and the mineral specimen that had cost James Harper his life. Emma took charge of the small bundle of food, organizing it with a methodical precision that reminded Miles of Eleanor's teaching background. The girl had clearly inherited her mother's practical intelligence. Daniel, despite his youth, insisted on carrying a water canteen nearly half his size, his jaw set with stubborn pride. Alice walked between her mother and Miles, occasionally reaching for both their hands when the path grew steep, her quiet trust more affecting than any words. The snow fell heavier as they climbed into the mountains, nature providing additional cover for their escape. Matthew once again demonstrated his remarkable endurance, helping his younger siblings when they struggled. Emma and Daniel followed in solemn silence, too young to fully understand the danger, but aware enough to remain quiet and obedient. We'll reach the line shack by nightfall, Miles told Eleanor, as they paused to rest in the shelter of a rock overhang. It's basic but secure. We can spend the night there before continuing to Helena tomorrow. Eleanor nodded, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Do you think William believed your bluff about already sending copies of the evidence to the governor? Not entirely, Miles admitted, but it introduced doubt, made him reconsider his approach. He checked the horizon behind them, seeing no signs of pursuit yet. William always preferred certainty before acting. That's why he's dangerous. He plans meticulously. Like James, Eleanor said softly, always 3 steps ahead, considering every angle. A sad smile touched her lips. They might have respected each other in different circumstances. Miles considered this. Perhaps, though James fought for justice, while William seeks power. And you, Eleanor asked, what do you fight for, Miles Harrington? The question caught him off guard, forcing introspection he'd avoided for years. Once, I fought only for myself to build wealth as a barrier against pain, he finally answered. Now, he looked at her, at the children huddled nearby, at the wilderness surrounding them. Now I fight for a future I can face without shame. For justice for James, for your children's legacy. He hesitated, then added more quietly, and for the chance to become the man Catherine always believed I could be. The man you've helped me remember exists. Eleanor held his gaze, something powerful passing between them despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them. Adversity stripped away pretense, revealing true character beneath. We should continue, she said finally, though her eyes conveyed much more than her words. Daylight's fading. They resumed their journey, climbing steadily as the storm intensified around them. The line shack appeared as darkness fell, a simple one-room structure built as shelter for ranch hands working the high pastures. Basic but solid, with a stone fireplace and sturdy walls to ward off winter's assault. Miles quickly built a fire while Eleanor organized their meager supplies. The children huddled near the growing warmth, exhaustion evident in their drooping shoulders and heavy eyelids. Imama helped her mother arrange their few possessions, displaying the same quiet competence she'd shown throughout their ordeal. Miles had noticed how she often anticipated Eleanor's needs before they were spoken. Daniel, ever observant, examined the cabin's construction with curious eyes, asking Miles quietly about how the logs were sealed against the weather. Alice had withdrawn into herself, as she often did when frightened, but still managed a small smile when Miles winked at her across the fire, a tentative bridge of trust forming between them. "Get some rest," Miles told them. "We have another long day tomorrow." Matthew, stubborn as always, insisted on taking a watch shift despite his fatigue. "Pa would have kept watch," he stated with certainty. Miles recognized the boy's need to contribute, to honor his father's memory through action. 2 hours, he conceded. "Then you rest." As the children settled into sleep, wrapped in blankets near the fire, Miles and Eleanor sat by the single small window, watching snow accumulate outside. The storm had become a blizzard, howling around the cabin's eaves like a living entity. "No one will follow us in this," Eleanor observed, relief evident in her voice. "No," Miles agreed, "but it also means we're trapped here until it passes. We won't reach Helena tomorrow as planned." Eleanor considered this complication. Does that change things? William's plans? "It gives him more time to create his counter-narrative," Miles acknowledged. "But it also gives Isaac more time to reach the governor with our evidence." "If he made it through," Eleanor said softly, voicing the concern they both shared. "Isaac knows these mountains better than anyone," Miles assured her, hoping his confidence was justified. "If anyone can get through, it's him." They fell silent, listening to the storm's fury and the children's soft breathing. The line shack, crude as it was, felt like a sanctuary, a small island of warmth and life in the vast, cold wilderness. "Tell me about Catherine," Eleanor said suddenly, "if you don't mind speaking of her." Miles was surprised by the request, but found he didn't mind. She was vibrant, passionate about justice, about making the world better. A fond smile touched his lips at the memories. "She never let me get away with half measures or easy excuses, always pushed me to be better than I thought I could be." "She sounds remarkable." She was. Miles glanced at Eleanor. "In some ways, you remind me of her. The same strength, the same unwillingness to surrender to circumstances." "And James?" Eleanor asked. "Would you have liked him, do you think?" Miles considered this. "Yes, I believe I would have." His journal reveals a man of principle and courage, willing to stand against powerful forces to protect what was right. He paused. "A better man than I've been these past years." "You're too hard on yourself," Eleanor said gently. "Grief changes us. The question is whether we eventually find our way back to ourselves. Or forward to something new," Miles added, meeting her eyes. The moment stretched between them, possibilities unspoken but understood. Then a sound outside the cabin, faint but distinct, broke the spell. A crunch of snow beneath a careful boot. Miles immediately doused the lantern, motioning Eleanor to wake the children silently. He moved to the window, peering into the swirling whiteness. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the storm, a human figure approaching the cabin with deliberate caution. Miles reached for his rifle, positioning himself beside the door. Eleanor gathered the children in the far corner, her small revolver ready. The footsteps reached the cabin's porch, followed by a gentle knock. Miles tensed, finger on the trigger. "Harrington," a familiar voice called softly. "It's Sterling. I'm alone." Miles exchanged shocked glances with Eleanor. "Could be a trap," he whispered. "I know you're in there," Sterling continued. "I need to speak with you. It's about William's next move." After a moment's hesitation, Miles called back, "Approach slowly, hands where I can see them." The door creaked open, revealing Sterling, snow-covered and exhausted, his hands raised as instructed. "May I come in, before I freeze to death out here?" Miles kept his rifle trained on the banker as he entered. How did you find us? Followed your tracks before the snow covered them, Sterling admitted, moving gratefully toward the fire. I've been searching for hours. Nearly gave up. Why? Eleanor demanded, keeping the children behind her. Why would you help us after everything you've done? Sterling's face showed genuine regret as he looked at her. Because I never wanted James dead, Mrs. Harper. That was Pierce and William. I tried to warn James, but I was too late. Miles remembered the letter fragment he'd found among James's papers. Sterling's apparent warning about powerful interests. Prove it, Miles demanded, rifle still ready. Sterling reached slowly into his coat, removing a folded letter. This came by telegraph after you left the ranch. William's orders for Pierce and me. I thought you should see it. Miles took the paper cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on Sterling with one hand. The message was brief and chilling. Evidence of Harper conspiracy required immediately. Create necessary scenario. Eliminate all witnesses. Property must be secured by week's end. No exceptions. WG. He's planning to frame you, Sterling explained unnecessarily. Stage an attack on town officials. Make it appear the Harpers were dangerous criminals that you harbored. Everyone at your ranch will be implicated. Why are you telling us this? Miles asked, suspicion evident in his tone. You've been William's man from the beginning. Sterling laughed bitterly. His man? His prisoner is more accurate. He unbuttoned his collar, revealing ugly bruising around his throat. This is what happens when I question orders. And it's not just me. He has my family. My daughter in a prestigious boarding school that I'm never allowed to visit. My wife in a sanitarium where her condition mysteriously worsens whenever I show signs of defiance. The pain in Sterling's eyes appeared genuine, his hands shaking slightly as he rebuttoned his collar. You could have come forward sooner, Eleanor said, though her tone had softened slightly. And end up like James? Sterling shook his head. I was a coward. Still am, perhaps. But this, he gestured toward the children, executing children to cover up greed. I can't be part of it, no matter the cost. Miles lowered his rifle slightly. What exactly is William planning? Pierce and a dozen men will attack your ranch at dawn, expecting to find you there. When they discover you're gone, they'll burn it to the ground and claim you fired first. Sterling's expression was grim. Meanwhile, William has telegraphed the governor with accusations that you're harboring dangerous squatters who murdered a federal agent. The man in the snow, Miles realized. William is claiming he was a government man killed by the Harpers? Sterling nodded. The story is that James Harper killed him for investigating illegal mining activities, and that his family and you are conspirators. That's absurd, Eleanor protested. No one would believe. People believe what authority figures tell them, Sterling interrupted, especially when those figures represent the government and the accusation involves vulnerable foreigners. Miles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. William was playing a masterful game, creating a counter-narrative that would effectively neutralize their evidence before it could be properly considered. What about Isaac? Miles asked. If he reaches the governor with our evidence, he won't, Sterling said flatly. William has men watching at all approaches to Helena. Your foreman was intercepted 3 hours ago. The news hit like a physical blow. Their primary plan had failed. Is Isaac alive? Miles demanded. For now. William prefers to gather all his enemies for a single incident rather than create multiple suspicious deaths. Sterling looked between them. You have until dawn to surrender yourselves at the ranch. After that, William has authorized maximum force against armed resistors. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, huddling closer together. We need a new plan, Miles finally said, mind racing through rapidly diminishing options. There is one possibility, Sterling offered hesitantly. Not without risk, but perhaps your only chance now. We're listening, and Eleanor said, moving to stand beside Miles. William is expecting you to either run or return to the ranch. He's prepared for both scenarios. Sterling leaned forward. But he's not expecting you to confront him directly in town, with witnesses present. Miles considered this. Public exposure? Force him to defend his actions in front of the townspeople? Exactly. Tomorrow is Founders' Day. The entire town will gather in the square for the celebration. William plans to attend as an honored guest before riding out to your ranch. Sterling's expression was intent. If you appear publicly, present your evidence before everyone, including several journalists visiting for the occasion, William would be forced to respond without violence. Or he could simply order our immediate arrest based on his fabricated charges, Miles countered. Not if you have leverage, Sterling said meaningfully, something even William can't ignore or dismiss. Like what? Sterling smiled thinly. Like me, a cooperative witness willing to testify against him. And this, he removed a small book from his inner pocket. My own record of every transaction, every order, every threat William has made over the past 3 years. Insurance I never thought I'd be brave enough to use. Miles and Eleanor exchanged glances, silently weighing the proposal. It was dangerous, certainly, but perhaps their best remaining option. Why would you take this risk? Eleanor asked Sterling. Your family are already in danger, Sterling finished for her. If William succeeds here, he'll have no reason to keep us alive as leverage. We'd become loose ends. He looked at each of them in turn. This may be my only chance to free them, and perhaps atone for my role in James's death. Miles studied the banker's face, searching for signs of deception. Finding none, he made his decision. We'll need to reach town undetected. I have a plan for that too, Sterling assured him, but we must move quickly. The storm won't last forever. As they began discussing details, Matthew approached, his young face solemn. You're going to trust him? He asked Miles quietly. After everything? Miles placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes, Matthew, people surprise you. The ones you least expect to stand up can find their courage at the critical moment. He glanced at Sterling, who was now explaining escape routes to Eleanor. And sometimes a shared enemy creates unlikely allies. Matthew considered this wisdom, then nodded slowly. Pa used to say, judge people by their actions, not their words. Your father was a wise man, Miles agreed. And tomorrow we'll see if Sterling's actions match his promises. Outside, the blizzard began to wane, the wind's howl diminishing to a whisper. The snow would stop by morning, leaving a transformed landscape, pristine, unmarked, full of both danger and possibility. Like the path that stretched before them now, Miles reflected. No guarantees, only choices and their consequences. He looked at Eleanor, her face illuminated by the fire's glow as she studied the map Sterling had brought. She must have sensed his gaze because she looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. No words passed between them, but understanding did. Whatever came tomorrow, they would face it together. For the first time in 5 years, Miles welcomed the dawn and whatever it might bring. Fear remained certainly, but it no longer paralyzed him. Catherine would have recognized this version of him, the man who stood for something beyond himself, who fought for others rather than retreating into isolation. The debt collector had found something worth more than any financial obligation. He'd found purpose, connection, and perhaps even redemption. As the children finally drifted to sleep and the adults continued planning their desperate gambit, one thought sustained Miles. Whatever happened tomorrow, he had already been transformed by his encounter with the Harper family. The frozen heart he'd carried since Catherine's death had finally begun to thaw, awakening him to life's possibilities once more. And that, regardless of the outcome, was a victory William could never take from him. Dawn broke clear and cold over White Ridge, the storm having moved eastward during the night. Fresh snow blanketed the town, pristine and deceptively peaceful. American flags hung from storefronts in celebration of Founders Day, and a makeshift platform had been erected in the town square for speeches and presentations. Miles watched from the shadowed alley beside the general store, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Beside him, Eleanor stood wrapped in a borrowed coat, her face partially obscured by a woolen scarf. They had left the children hidden at Dr. Callahan's home on the outskirts of town, reuniting briefly with Sophia, whose fever had finally broken under the doctor's care. Sterling should have been here by now, Eleanor whispered, anxiety evident in her voice. He'll come, Miles assured her, though his own doubts grew with each passing minute. Their entire plan hinged on Sterling's cooperation. Without his testimony and records, they had only circumstantial evidence against William. The town square gradually filled with residents emerging from their homes and businesses, gathering for the celebration despite the bitter cold. Pierce stood near the platform, directing workers, making final arrangements, his manner officious and self-important. Then William appeared, walking down the main street with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command. He wore a formal military uniform today, medals gleaming on his chest, the silver star prominent on his hat. Several town officials hurried to greet him, fawning in the presence of such distinguished authority. "Where is Sterling?" Eleanor whispered again, more urgently. Before Miles could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. A horse galloped into town, its rider slumped forward, clinging to the saddle. As townsfolk rushed to help, Miles recognized Isaac Turner, his foreman, bloodied but alive. William and Pierce exchanged sharp glances, moving quickly to intercept as Isaac was helped from his horse. "Perfect timing," a voice said from behind them. Miles and Eleanor turned to find Sterling, his face pale but determined. "Your foreman escaped during the night. William's men have been searching the mountains since dawn." "You're late," Miles observed, relief mingling with lingering suspicion. "Had to make sure my family was secured first," Sterling explained. "I sent men I trust to remove them from William's reach." He nodded toward the gathering crowd. "It's time. William's distracted by your foreman's arrival." Miles took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. "You're certain about this?" Sterling's smile was grim. "No, but it's the only chance any of us have." Eleanor reached for Miles' hand, squeezing it briefly. "For James," she said softly. "For our children's future." "For all of us," Miles agreed, returning the pressure before releasing her hand. Together, the unlikely allies emerged from the alley and moved purposefully toward the town square. They were halfway there when William spotted them, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation. "Miles," he called, voice carrying across the square. "How unexpected. And Mrs. Harper as well. You've saved us the trouble of searching for you." The crowd parted as William approached, flanked by Pierce and two men with the unmistakable bearing of hired guns. Murmurs spread through the gathered townspeople. Many recognized Eleanor, and speculation about her presence with Miles rippled outward. "I believe you have been looking for us," Miles replied evenly, stopping a prudent distance from William. "Something about charges against the Harper family?" William's smile was thin. "Indeed, serious charges, conspiracy, interference with federal interests, possibly even murder." His gaze hardened as he noticed Sterling. "Victor, your presence is unexpected." "I imagine it is," Sterling replied, straightening, despite the fear evident in his eyes. William assessed the situation quickly, glancing around at the growing crowd of witnesses. "Perhaps we should discuss these matters privately," he suggested smoothly. "At the sheriff's office, perhaps." "I think here is appropriate," Miles countered, "given that your accusations are public now. The townspeople deserve to know the truth about what's happening in their valley." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And what truth would that be?" Instead of answering directly, Miles turned to address the gathered crowd. "Many of you knew James Harper," he began, his voice carrying in the cold air. "A hard-working man who died last fall in what was called an accident." Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. "That accident was no accident," Miles continued. "James Harper was murdered because he discovered something valuable beneath his land, something certain powerful interests wanted badly enough to kill for." William stepped forward. "These are serious and unfounded accusations, Harrington. You're distressing these good people with conspiracy theories." "Not theories," Sterling interjected, producing his ledger. "Facts documented over 3 years of systematic land theft and intimidation." He turned to face the crowd. "Many of you have lost neighbors, friends who supposedly left suddenly or suffered convenient accidents. Their lands were acquired through fraud and coercion, all to secure access to valuable minerals." Pierce moved toward Sterling, hand drifting toward his concealed weapon, but Miles subtly shifted to block him. Dr. Callahan emerged from the crowd. "I can confirm unusual patterns in recent deaths," he stated clearly, "including James Harper's, which showed evidence inconsistent with a simple fall." William's composed facade began to show cracks. "This is absurd. I am a decorated military officer here on official business." "What official business would that be, William?" Miles interrupted. "The acquisition of rare earth minerals for government contracts? Or eliminating witnesses to your methods?" A ripple of shock moved through the crowd at the familiar way Miles addressed the general. You're out of your depth, Miles, William warned, voice lowered. Don't make this personal. It became personal when you had James Harper killed, Miles replied. When you threatened his widow and children, when you planned to frame them for crimes they didn't commit. Eleanor stepped forward, removing her scarf to reveal her face fully. Many in the crowd recognized her, expressions of sympathy appearing on several faces. My husband documented everything, she said clearly. The systematic acquisition of lands along a specific mineral vein, the threats against those who wouldn't sell, the accidents that followed. He died trying to expose the truth. William's expression darkened. Mrs. Harper, your husband was engaged in illegal mining activities on federal land. He resisted arrest and died fleeing authorities. Your continued propagation of these fantasies will only worsen your situation. Lies, Isaac Turner called from where he stood, supported by two townsmen. I carried the truth to the governor. Delivered it myself before dawn today. William's head snapped toward Isaac, genuine surprise crossing his features. That's right, William, Miles confirmed. While you were focused on us, Isaac completed his mission. The territorial governor has James Harper's journal, maps, and evidence. As we speak, federal marshals not under your influence are being dispatched to investigate. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across William's face. He glanced at Pierce, who appeared equally disconcerted by this development. Sterling seized the moment, stepping forward to address the crowd directly. I've been part of this conspiracy, he admitted, voice carrying clearly, forced through threats against my family, but complicit nonetheless. My records confirm everything the Harpers documented, including direct orders from General Grant to acquire these lands by any means necessary. The admission sent shockwaves through the gathered townspeople. Sterling was a known figure, respected despite his hard business practices. His confession carried weight. William's hand moved to his sidearm. This is treason, he hissed. You'll all hang. No, William, Miles countered, producing the mineral specimen from his coat. This is evidence. The rare earth mineral your own geological surveys identified, valuable enough to kill for, but not worth the lives it's already cost. He turned to the crowd. This isn't about patriotism or progress. It's about greed masked as national interest. A murmur of anger rose from the townspeople, many of whom had lost friends or neighbors to the mysterious accidents now being explained. William recognized the shifting mood, his military mind quickly assessing the deteriorating tactical situation. With a subtle gesture to Pierce and his men, he began backing toward his horse. This isn't over, Miles, he warned. You have no idea what forces you're challenging. Perhaps not, Miles acknowledged, but I know what I'm defending. Do you? Before William could respond, the thunder of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A group of riders entered the town square, territorial marshals, their badges gleaming in the winter sunlight. At their head rode Governor Mitchell himself, his expression grave as he surveyed the scene. General Grant, the governor called, dismounting, I received some very disturbing documents this morning concerning your activities in this region. I've come to investigate personally. William's face went rigid, the last of his composure evaporating as he realized the extent of his exposure. With a lightning movement, he drew his weapon, aiming not at the governor or Miles, but at Eleanor. Drop your weapons, he commanded the marshals, or the woman dies first. Miles moved instinctively, placing himself between William and Eleanor. It's over, William. You've lost. For a suspended moment, William's finger tightened on the trigger, rage and calculation warring in his eyes. Then, with startling suddenness, he swung toward Pierce instead and fired. Pierce collapsed, a look of shocked betrayal on his face as blood blossomed across his chest. Before anyone could react, William vaulted onto his horse and spurted into a gallop, firing indiscriminately to clear his path. After him, the governor shouted, marshals scrambling to remount. Miles held Eleanor close as chaos erupted around them, townsfolk diving for cover as William's men exchanged fire with the marshals. Sterling pulled them into the shelter of a nearby storefront as bullets splintered wood nearby. Are you hurt? Miles asked Eleanor urgently, checking her for injuries. No, she assured him, though her face was pale with shock. The children are safe with Dr. Callahan, Miles reminded her. We need to stay here until... A final volley of gunfire interrupted him, followed by an eerie silence. Cautiously, they emerged to find William's men either surrendered or fallen. In the distance, marshals pursued the fleeting figure of William Grant, his horse kicking up snow as he fled toward the mountain pass. The governor approached, his expression grim but respectful. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Harrington, your evidence was compelling enough to bring me here personally." He glanced toward the distant pursuit. "Grant won't escape. The pass is already guarded." The following hours passed in a blur of statements, testimonies, and reunions. The Harper children were brought from Dr. Callahan's home, Sophia still weak but improving, the others wide-eyed at the commotion in town. Sterling provided his records to the governor's investigators, securing promises of protection for his family in exchange for his full cooperation. By nightfall, word arrived. William Grant had been cornered in the mountain pass. Rather than surrender, he had chosen a final desperate dash through the marshal's line. His horse had lost footing on the icy trail, sending both mount and rider over a cliff edge in a grim echo of James Harper's fate. Miles received the news with complex emotions: relief that the threat had ended, regret for the brother-in-law Catherine had loved despite his flaws, closure for a chapter of his life long unfinished. He found Eleanor on the porch of the hotel where the governor had arranged rooms for them. She stood wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "William?" she asked as Miles joined her. "Dead," he confirmed quietly. "The mountains have a way of dispensing their own justice, it seems." Eleanor nodded, accepting the news without visible emotion. "And the children's future? Our land? The governor has promised a full investigation. All fraudulent transfers will be reversed, compensation paid to affected families." Miles stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "The Harper land remains yours, with full mineral rights. The government will negotiate fair terms if they wish to access the deposits." "James would be satisfied with that," Eleanor said softly. Justice was what he wanted, not vengeance. Miles hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on him since the confrontation ended. "What will you do now? Rebuild the cabin?" Eleanor turned to face him fully, her expression open and direct. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain former debt collector might have other suggestions." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Perhaps something involving a ranch that needs a family to make it truly a home." Miles's heart swelled with unexpected joy. "I believe that could be arranged," he said carefully, "though such arrangements usually involve certain formalities. In time." "Time," Eleanor agreed, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Something we have now, thanks to you." Miles reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Thanks to us." Above them, the winter stars burned with a cold fire, distant and eternal. But here on this porch, in this moment, warmth bloomed between them. The promise of spring after the longest winter. Inside the hotel, 5 children slept peacefully for the first time in months, secure in the knowledge that justice had been served and that their future, though changed forever, would be built on truth rather than lies. Emma had fallen asleep with her arm protectively around Sophia, the caretaker role she'd assumed after James's death, now ingrained in her nature. Daniel clutched the small, whittled horse Miles had made him during their journey, his sleeping face showing traces of the thoughtful man he would someday become. Alice, who had spoken the least throughout their ordeal, but perhaps felt things most deeply, had whispered to Miles before drifting off, "Are you staying forever?" A question that encompassed all the loss and hope a 6-year-old could express. And Miles Harrington, once a man who collected debts from others, discovered that his own greatest debt had finally been paid, the obligation to fully live the life Catherine had wanted for him, to open his heart again after years of self-imposed isolation. The frozen heart of winter had begun to thaw, revealing the promise of new growth beneath.